In the dark, endless expanse of space, where stars blinked like distant memories, Earth's most advanced deep space fleet hovered, caught in an eerie stillness. The vastness of space was beautiful, but it was also empty, a silence so complete it could make one feel small and insignificant. Captain Ariana Knight stood on the bridge of the Elysium, her eyes scanning the star-filled void. Her crew was on high alert, ready for any orders she might give. But right now, there was nothing to command, nothing to do except wait. And the waiting was starting to feel unbearable. Then, a sudden beep broke the silence. Ariana's eyes snapped to the control panel, her pulse quickening. The sound was coming from a deep space scanner, a device used to track the faintest signals from across the galaxy. This signal, however, was different. It wasn't a standard transmission from a starship or an intergalactic message. No, this was something else entirely. It was a distress signal, but it wasn't quite like any they had received before. The message was faint, barely more than a whisper, yet it echoed through the empty bridge. "Help us. The darkness. It's coming." Ariana frowned, feeling a chill creep down her spine. She could hear the urgency in the voice, but the signal was interrupted by static, making it impossible to determine its exact origin. The words "darkness" and "coming" echoed in her mind, sending a shiver through her body. It sounded like a plea for help, but from who? And what darkness were they referring to? "Track the signal, Lieutenant," Ariana ordered, her voice steady despite the unease gnawing at her insides. Lieutenant Parker, a young officer with a sharp mind and an even sharper focus, quickly adjusted the coordinates on his console. His fingers danced across the screen, typing in commands to triangulate the source of the signal. The Elysium was equipped with the latest technology, capable of detecting even the faintest whispers across the galaxy. Yet this signal was proving to be elusive. It wasn't coming from any known station or ship, and there were no records of it in the fleet's archives. After a tense silence, Parker spoke again, his voice tight with disbelief. "Captain, the signal. It's coming from an uncharted region of space. We've never mapped this area before." Ariana's brow furrowed. Uncharted regions of space were dangerous, unknown, full of mysteries that could be deadly. She stared at the map on the screen, watching the blinking dot that indicated the signal source. It was a massive distance away, deeper into space than they had ever ventured before. "Set a course," Ariana said firmly. "We need to investigate. Prepare the crew for a potential rescue operation." There was hesitation in the air, an unspoken reluctance among the officers around her. No one was thrilled by the prospect of venturing into unknown territory, especially when it involved a signal they couldn't understand. But the sense of duty was stronger. If someone needed help, they couldn't ignore it. Ariana herself wasn't sure what to expect, but she trusted her crew, and she trusted the technology. They would find out what this signal meant. As the Elysium changed course, heading toward the mysterious signal, the crew went to work, preparing for whatever lay ahead. The ship's engines hummed. The crew worked quickly and efficiently, but the atmosphere on the bridge was heavy. There was something unsettling about this entire situation, and no one could quite place their finger on it. The unknown was always a little bit terrifying, but this felt different. Hours passed as they made their way toward the source of the signal. The deeper they traveled, the darker space seemed to get. It wasn't just the absence of light. There was an odd feeling in the air, as if something was watching them. Ariana stood at the helm, her hands clasped behind her back, her gaze fixed on the vast emptiness outside the window. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, waiting. "Captain," Parker said, breaking the silence, "we're getting closer. The signal is getting stronger." Ariana nodded but didn't respond. Her mind raced with questions. Who could be sending this signal? And why now, after so many years of silence in this part of space? What was the darkness the message spoke of? She knew it wasn't just some malfunction or random transmission. There was something deliberate about it, something calculated. The ship's lights flickered briefly, but Ariana paid it no mind. It was probably just a glitch in the system. Still, it made her uneasy. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Elysium arrived at the coordinates. The star-filled void was now replaced by the shadow of something large, something that shouldn't be there. Ahead, floating like an ancient relic in the dark abyss, was the source of the signal. An abandoned junk ship, its exterior battered and scarred from years of neglect. It was an unsettling sight, the ship seemingly abandoned, yet still there. Ariana's heart skipped a beat as she stared at the wreckage. The ship was old, but there was something eerie about it. It looked like it had been drifting in space for centuries, its surface covered in strange symbols and markings. As the Elysium approached, a strange chill filled the air. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, each one silently questioning what kind of discovery they were about to make. "Prepare for boarding," Ariana ordered, her voice unwavering, though her gut twisted with uncertainty. The crew readied themselves, but no one could escape the growing sense of unease. Whatever this junk ship had been, it wasn't just a derelict vessel. Something had happened here, a mystery that was about to unfold in a way none of them could imagine. And as the Elysium drew closer, the whispers from the wreckage grew louder, filling the silence with an unmistakable warning. The darkness. It's coming. The Elysium floated in the dark void, silent except for the hum of its engines. Captain Ariana Knight stared out the viewports, her eyes fixed on the derelict ship ahead. The junk vessel loomed like a ghost from the past, its hull pockmarked with years of damage. Faded markings on its sides hinted at a long-forgotten era, and the strange symbols etched into the metal sent a ripple of unease through Ariana. "Lieutenant Parker, are you seeing this?" Ariana's voice broke the tense silence. "Yes, Captain," Parker replied, his voice laced with uncertainty. "It's unlike anything we've encountered. There's no registry for this ship, no record of it anywhere." Ariana nodded, her instincts screaming that something wasn't right. "We need to board and investigate. Send a team to the airlock." "Aye, Captain," Parker responded. The crew sprang into action, preparing for the unknown. Ariana could feel the weight of their eyes on her as they donned their suits, each one of them aware that whatever they were about to uncover could change everything. Minutes later, the airlock hissed as the outer door opened. A small team of soldiers, led by Lieutenant Rachel, stepped out onto the darkened surface of the junk ship. Their footsteps echoed eerily across the hollow metal as they moved cautiously toward the hatch that led inside. The ship was as still as death, its structure sagging with the weight of abandonment. No lights, no movement, just the cold, silent emptiness of space surrounding them. Rachel reached for the hatch, her gloved hand trembling slightly. "Ready, Captain," she radioed. Ariana's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the team on the monitor. "Open it." With a loud creak, the hatch slowly opened, revealing a dimly lit interior. The faintest glimmer of light filtered through the broken windows, casting strange shadows across the abandoned halls. The smell of stale air and decay wafted out, as if the ship had been abandoned for far longer than its external appearance suggested. The team stepped inside, their weapons raised, their eyes scanning every corner. The silence was deafening, the air thick with the weight of something unspoken. Rachel's voice crackled over the comms, tense and full of warning. "Captain, there's something off about this place. It's like no one has been here for years, but there are signs of recent activity." Ariana felt her stomach tighten. What kind of activity? "Food wrappers, empty med kits. It looks like someone left in a hurry," Rachel reported. "But there's no sign of life. No bodies. Just emptiness." The team moved deeper into the ship's interior, carefully checking each room and hallway. The atmosphere grew heavier with each step, as if the very walls of the vessel were watching them. It wasn't long before they stumbled upon something truly unsettling. In the heart of the ship, they found a control room. The monitors flickered faintly, showing static-filled images of distant galaxies and star systems, But on one screen, something different appeared. A symbol, one that matched the strange markings on the ship's exterior. It was a jagged black design, pulsing with an otherworldly glow. Rachel's voice came through the comms again, her tone full of disbelief. "Captain, you need to see this." Ariana's heart raced as she made her way to the control room, her mind already racing with possibilities. Could this be related to the signal they had intercepted? Was this ship the source? As she entered the room, the crew fell silent, their eyes fixed on the screen. The symbol seemed to pulse, drawing them in, as if calling them to understand its meaning. Ariana moved closer, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. She had seen symbols like this before, in ancient texts and legends from long-forgotten civilizations. But this wasn't something from history. It was something far more dangerous. A sudden noise broke her focus. A low, grinding sound reverberated through the ship's walls, followed by a series of distant thuds. The crew froze, the hairs on the back of their necks standing up. It was a noise that shouldn't have been there, a noise that seemed to come from somewhere deep within the ship. What was that? Lieutenant Parker's voice was sharp with tension. "I don't know," Ariana said, her voice steady, though her pulse raced. "But it doesn't sound good. Stay alert." The lights flickered again, casting the control room in shadows. Then the signal flared to life on the screen, clearer than before. The pulsing symbol flickered and morphed, taking on a new form, a twisted face with hollow, empty eyes, staring back at them. A chill ran down Ariana's spine. The face seemed to be alive, its gaze tracking their every movement, its mouth opening slightly as if to speak. And then it happened. The comm system crackled, and a voice, weak and desperate, poured through the static. "Leave. Leave now, before it's too late." The crew jumped, their weapons raised instinctively. The voice was faint, barely audible, but the terror in it was unmistakable. "Who's there?" Ariana demanded, her voice firm despite the creeping dread. "Identify yourself." But there was no response, only the haunting sound of the voice repeating the warning. "Leave. Leave now." Ariana's mind raced. Who had sent this message? Was it a crew member from another ship, or was it something else? "Captain, this ship. It's cursed," Rachel muttered, her voice trembling. "We shouldn't be here." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but Ariana stood firm. They couldn't turn back now. The signal had drawn them here for a reason, and it was her duty to find out what had happened. But deep down, Ariana knew that the truth might be far worse than any of them had imagined. "Get the team back to the Elysium," Ariana ordered, her voice cold and resolute. "We're not leaving until we uncover the truth." But as the crew made their way back to the airlock, something moved in the shadows, something unseen, yet unmistakable. It was waiting for them, lurking in the darkness of the abandoned ship. The haunted junk ship had only just begun to reveal its horrors, and Ariana knew, with a sinking feeling in her chest, that they were far from alone. The crew of the Elysium stood in tense silence as they reboarded their ship, their minds buzzed with the strange encounter aboard the junk vessel. Ariana Knight paced in her command room, her eyes narrowed, trying to piece together the puzzle. That voice, it had sounded real. Too real. And the message, "Leave before it's too late," was a warning, not just a cry for help. The feeling of dread that had been creeping along the edges of Ariana's mind now consumed her whole. The junk ship was no longer just a mystery. It was a predator, and the crew of the Elysium were its prey. As she stood in the center of the room, staring at the figure that had emerged from the walls, Ariana felt her heartbeat quicken. It was like her body had frozen in place, unwilling to move, unwilling to breathe. The figure was tall, its silhouette a blur of shadow and twisted light. It stood perfectly still, its features too distorted to make out. There was something alien about it, something that didn't belong in the galaxy. Its eyes, or what appeared to be eyes, glowed faintly with an unnatural light, and they seemed to pierce through her very soul. Leave now, or join us. The voice reverberated through the room, a whisper that felt like 1,000 voices speaking in unison. Ariana's pulse raced. She had no idea what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let this ship claim her or her crew. With a sharp intake of breath, she snapped back to reality. The air in the room felt thick, almost as if it were pressing in on her. She needed to think. She needed to escape. The communication systems were down, and her team was lost. She was alone. The figure moved again, its steps slow and deliberate, and the walls of the room seemed to pulse with every motion it made. Ariana's eyes darted to the exit, but the door was gone. Instead, there was nothing but a wall of darkness that stretched endlessly, suffocating everything in its path. "No," Ariana muttered to herself, stepping back. "I'm not going to die here. Not like this." She glanced around the room, her mind racing for a plan. The symbols, those shifting, twisting patterns on the walls. They weren't just decorations. They were connected to the ship. They were alive, just like the ship itself. They were its heartbeat. The answer was simple, but it came with a terrible price. Ariana knew what she had to do. With a trembling hand, she reached for her emergency flare. It was the only weapon she had left, and it might be the only way to escape this nightmare. She tore the flare open, and as its bright light flooded the room, the shadows recoiled. The figure shrieked, its form writhing in agony as the flare's light burned through the darkness. The symbols on the walls flickered and crackled, as if the ship itself was in pain. But the light didn't last. The flare dimmed, and the figure began to regenerate, its shape shifting back into its original, terrifying form. But something was different now. The room was shifting. The walls no longer looked like walls. They were rippling, warping, as though they were part of the figure itself. Ariana's breath caught in her throat as she realized the truth. The ship was alive. Every inch of it, every corner, every scrap of metal. It was all part of a single, living organism. It was feeding off them, and it wouldn't stop until it had devoured everything. Her mind spun, but she couldn't afford to waste time. The junk ship was not just a derelict vessel. It was an ancient, sentient entity, and it was hungry. Ariana turned, searching for any sign of escape. But there was nothing. "You cannot escape," the voice whispered again, this time much louder, as though the ship itself was speaking directly to her. "We have waited for so long. For you." Ariana's hand tightened around the flare. There had to be a way out. She wasn't going to let herself, or her crew, become part of the ship's nightmare. Suddenly, a burst of static erupted in her ear. It was Parker's voice, distant and distorted, but it was enough to send a spark of hope through her. "Captain, we've located the source of the power fluctuations." Parker's voice was faint, barely audible through the static. "You need to get to the core. It's the only way to stop it." The core. That was the heart of the ship, where its power was generated. If Parker was right, destroying it might kill the ship, or at least sever its connection to whatever dark force controlled it. Ariana didn't hesitate. She turned on her heel and ran, her boots pounding against the metal floor as she sprinted toward the heart of the ship. She had no idea what she was about to face, but she couldn't afford to waste another second. As she ran, the ship seemed to fight back. The walls shifted, closing in on her, and strange shapes emerged from the darkness. Twisted figures, half-formed and shifting like phantoms, reached out to grab her, but Ariana dodged them, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, she reached the core. It was massive, a glowing orb of energy at the center of the ship, surrounded by tendrils of metal that seemed to pulse with life. The power surged through it, filling the room with an oppressive hum. Ariana approached cautiously, her mind racing. She didn't have much time. If she didn't act now, the ship would consume them all. She raised the flare in her hand, ready to throw it into the core. But before she could make her move, the ship reacted. The orb of energy flared bright, and the shadows around her twisted into something tangible, something horrifying. The ship was alive, and it wasn't going down without a fight. "You cannot stop us," the voice echoed, growing louder and more desperate. "We will feed on you all." Ariana's heart raced as she realized the true horror of what she was dealing with. This wasn't just a haunted junk ship. It was a living, breathing entity, a parasite that had fed on entire civilizations. And now, it wanted them. The flare's light burned brighter, illuminating the room as Ariana hurled it into the core. But would it be enough? Or would they all become part of the ship's twisted legacy? The question remained unanswered as the darkness began to close in once again. Ariana's heart pounded in her chest as the flare arced through the air, heading toward the core. Time seemed to slow as she watched it soar through the dark, crackling air, a final desperate hope for survival. The ship's core pulsated, its glow intensifying as though it recognized the threat. But the flare struck its mark, and a blinding flash of light exploded, filling the entire room with searing brightness. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just an overwhelming silence that made Ariana's skin crawl. Then the rumbling started. The ship shuddered violently, its walls groaning as if they were alive, racked by some terrible, agonizing force. Ariana staggered back, raising her arms to shield her eyes from the blinding light as the ship's power surged and cracked. The dark, twisted walls that had seemed to pulse with life now convulsed, as if the ship were struggling to maintain its own existence. Something was happening. The ship was dying. But was it enough? Would the flare's light be enough to sever the ship's control over the crew? Or had Ariana just unleashed something far worse? She didn't know. And she didn't have time to figure it out. The walls of the room began to collapse inward, the metal buckling and cracking, as if the very structure of the ship was disintegrating. Ariana ran, her breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. She couldn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Every step took her closer to an unknown fate, and yet she felt the pull of something far worse lurking behind her. The ship's voice boomed once more, its distorted tone laced with fury. "You cannot destroy us. We are eternal." Ariana didn't listen. She couldn't afford to. Her thoughts were a whirlwind as she raced through the chaotic, ever-shifting corridors. The once straight paths were now twisting mazes, the ship's walls warping in impossible angles. The crew, where were they? There was no time to think about that now. She had to get to the escape pods. If there was any chance of survival, that was their only hope. As she sprinted down the corridor, the walls seemed to close in on her. The ship's tendrils reached out from the sides, trying to grab her, to pull her into the darkness. But Ariana swerved and dodged, narrowly escaping each grasp. Her breath came faster now, and the darkness at the edges of her vision grew more intense. She had to stay focused. One wrong move, and it would all be over. Ahead, she saw it, the escape pods. They were just within reach. But her joy was short-lived. The ship's pulse hit an unbearable crescendo, and the very floor beneath Ariana's feet began to break apart, opening into a deep, dark void. The walls crumbled, and the ship was falling apart around her. She wasn't going to make it. But then something unexpected happened. The ship let out a final, tortured scream. Its walls shuddered one last time, and the lights flickered as if the very life of the junk ship had been extinguished. The rumbling stopped. The growl of the ship's voice silenced. The walls stopped moving. The ship was no longer twisting and turning. It felt still. For a brief moment, Ariana thought she might have done it. She thought she had won. But the feeling of dread never left her, and her instincts screamed that something far worse was about to happen. Suddenly, the walls shifted once more. This time, they didn't just move. They opened. Before Ariana could react, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Tall, armored, and towering over her, it looked almost human, but its eyes were like black pits, empty and endless. It was the thing that had been haunting the ship, the entity behind its terror. Ariana's body went cold, and she froze. It wasn't just the ship that had been alive. This thing, it was the true heart of the junk ship, and it was more terrifying than anything she had faced so far. The figure stepped forward, and the air around it seemed to ripple with energy, distorting the very space itself. Its voice came in a whisper, cold, ancient, and filled with malice. "You thought you could stop us." Ariana's heart sank. She wasn't ready for this. She couldn't fight something like this. She'd been hoping for a miracle, and it seemed like it was slipping away. But she wasn't done. Not yet. With every ounce of strength, Ariana fought back her fear, grabbed a nearby piece of debris, and threw it at the figure. The object passed through it as if it were made of smoke. It wasn't real. The ship wasn't real. It was a living nightmare. Her pulse quickened, and panic surged in her chest. There was no way out. The ship was collapsing. The escape pods wouldn't work. And this creature, it was far from done. Ariana staggered backward, but she couldn't afford to turn away. There was only one thing left she could do. She had to face it. And if she was going down, she wasn't going down without a fight. The figure loomed closer, and as it did, the ship's walls began to crumble even faster, the destruction all around her growing worse by the second. But there was something inside her, a spark that refused to be extinguished. Ariana clenched her fists. The crew was still out there. She couldn't give up. With one final, desperate cry, Ariana rushed toward the creature. Whatever it was, whatever power it held, it wasn't going to take her without a fight. She had to stop it before it could reach the others. But as she ran toward it, she suddenly understood the truth. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a race against time. The ship was collapsing, and if she didn't find a way to destroy it for good, they'd all become part of the haunted junk ship's endless legacy. Ariana's breath was ragged, her heart pounding in her chest as she faced the creature. It towered before her, its form a swirling mass of darkness, its presence so overwhelming that it seemed to distort the very air around them. Every step she took, every thought she had, felt as though it was being crushed under the weight of its oppressive power. The walls of the ship were coming down, breaking apart like fragile glass, and the sound of metal tearing apart was deafening. The ship's collapse was no longer a distant threat. It was happening now, and the creature seemed to be at the very center of it all. It's alive. The junk ship, the entity, the thing in front of her, it was all one, and it was hungry. Ariana's hands trembled, but she kept her stance firm. Her mind raced, looking for a way out, a way to survive. The escape pods were too far away, and she could see the shadows of the rest of the crew running through the ship, caught in the same nightmare. The creature, whatever it was, let out a sound, a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through her very bones. You cannot escape. Ariana knew the truth now. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a battle for freedom. The creature was feeding on the souls of those trapped within the ship. It was not just a monster. It was the embodiment of every tragedy, every death that had ever occurred aboard the haunted junk ship. The wreckage, the terror, it was all part of the creature's hunger. But Ariana wasn't going to let it consume her. She couldn't. Not now. As the walls continued to crumble, Ariana scanned the surroundings. She was trapped in the ship's core now, the center of its destruction. But amid the chaos, her eyes caught sight of something she had missed earlier. A control panel. It was flickering weakly, its lights barely functional, but it was enough. It was a chance. The core. The ship's core was the heart of its power. If she could destroy it, she could kill the creature, put an end to the nightmare. But it wouldn't be easy. She had to act fast. Ariana dashed toward the control panel, ignoring the creature's chilling voice in the background. You will never stop us. She reached the panel, her fingers moving frantically over the buttons. The ship's systems were failing, but it wasn't completely gone. There was still power running through the veins of the ship, enough to send a pulse that could destroy everything. But it was risky. One wrong move, and the explosion could tear apart the entire ship and everything with it. She hesitated for just a moment. Was she ready to make that sacrifice? Could she destroy everything in order to save the galaxy from this abomination? The answer was clear. Ariana slammed her fist onto the final button, activating the self-destruct sequence. The core screamed in protest, its pulse quickening. The ship's walls shuddered violently, and the creature let out a howl of pure rage. "You think you can end us? We are eternal." Ariana's legs buckled under the pressure of the energy building around her. The ship's control room was collapsing faster than she could keep up with. She stumbled, her breath coming in ragged gasps, as she forced herself toward the escape pods once more. There was no time to lose. She made it just in time. She leaped into the pod, the hatch slamming shut behind her, the engines kicking to life as she pulled away from the crumbling wreckage of the haunted junk ship. The ship's final scream echoed through the emptiness of space, a chilling, terrifying sound that would haunt Ariana's dreams forever. But as the distance between her and the ship grew, so did the sense of relief. It was over. For now, the galaxy would remain safe, the nightmare would fade into legend, and Ariana knew that no one would ever speak of the haunted junk ship again. But deep in the darkness of space, Ariana couldn't shake the feeling that something far worse was waiting. The creature might have been destroyed, but there were more out there. And someday, they would return. Ariana set her course for the nearest station. The crew, they were alive for now, but they would have to face the truth of what had happened on that ship. The galaxy would never forget the haunted junk ship. And neither would Ariana. Ariana stared out into the vast expanse of space, the stars twinkling in the distance like distant beacons of hope. The haunted junk ship was gone, reduced to nothing but debris scattered across the void. The crew had survived, barely, and the galaxy was safe for now. But there was something that still gnawed at her, a feeling she couldn't shake, a whisper in the back of her mind that something worse was coming. She tried to push it aside, to focus on the task at hand, but it lingered, a dark shadow in the corners of her thoughts. The galaxy was still recovering from the horrors of the junk ship, and Ariana knew that the events of the past few days would haunt her for the rest of her life. Yet it was the unknown that terrified her the most, the possibility that the nightmare had only just begun. As her ship coasted toward the nearby space station, Ariana's thoughts turned to her crew. They had managed to escape the wreckage of the haunted junk ship, but none of them had walked away unscathed. The terror, the images of twisted metal and tortured souls, had left a mark on them that they would carry forever. Ariana had spent hours trying to console them, to help them find a sense of normalcy again, but she knew the truth. There was no going back to what they had been before. They had all witnessed something beyond comprehension, something that no one should ever have to face. And while they might never speak of it again, the scars would remain. The station came into view, its sprawling structure floating in the blackness of space. It was a welcome sight, a symbol of safety and civilization after the chaos they had just escaped. But as they neared the docking bay, something caught Ariana's eye. A faint blip on her radar, too small to be a ship, but too odd to be ignored. Her heart skipped a beat as she zoomed in on the signal. It wasn't just a fluke or malfunction. It was real. A small, unmarked vessel was drifting just beyond the station's perimeter. It wasn't a civilian ship. There was no identification, no registration. Just a single ship, floating in space, as if waiting for something. Ariana's fingers hovered over the controls as she considered her options. She could report it to the station authorities, but something in her gut told her that this wasn't something that could be left to others. They had faced the haunted junk ship, and whatever this was, it felt connected. "Stay alert," she said, her voice low and steady as she turned to the crew behind her. "I have a bad feeling about this." The crew looked uneasy, but none of them argued. They had all felt the same strange sensation creeping over them as the ship approached. There was something about this unknown vessel that felt wrong. As Ariana navigated her ship closer to the mysterious craft, the tension in the air grew thick. The station's lights flickered briefly, as though the very energy of the station itself was being disrupted. But it was more than just a technical issue. There was something else, something far older, far darker. A soft, almost imperceptible hum emanated from the unknown ship, like a low, resonant pulse that echoed in the depths of their minds. It felt familiar, like the same force that had taken hold of the haunted junk ship. Ariana's pulse quickened. Could it be the same entity? Had it somehow survived? Before she could react, a sudden wave of energy washed over her ship, knocking her out of her seat. The crew shouted in alarm as the ship's systems flickered, the lights dimming as the ship veered dangerously close to the unknown vessel. Ariana gripped the controls, struggling to regain control. "Hold on," she shouted, her voice filled with urgency. The unknown ship didn't just sit there. It was pulling them in. Slowly, relentlessly, Ariana fought against the force. But it was too strong. The mysterious ship's grip tightened with every passing second. Then the ship spoke. Its voice was a distorted ancient sound that reverberated through the air like 100,000 whispers at once. "We are the last." The word sent chills down Ariana's spine. She felt the presence of something far more ancient and powerful than anything she had encountered before. The creature, the haunted ship, the terror, it wasn't over. The presence in the voice seemed to seep into her mind, wrapping around her thoughts, digging deep into her fears. She tried to fight it, to resist, but it was like the air itself was thick with an energy that drained her strength. But then, something unexpected happened. The ship's systems blinked back to life, the energy surge weakening as Ariana's resolve hardened. She refused to let it take them. "No," she whispered through gritted teeth. "We are not yours." With a defiant roar, Ariana hit the throttle, slamming the ship into full reverse. The energy field fighting to hold them in place weakened, just enough for her to break free. She barely managed to pull away, the unknown ship's pull still tugging at the edge of her consciousness. As they distanced themselves, the ship's voice echoed once more, its tone almost mournful. "You cannot escape. We are eternal." Ariana didn't look back. The truth was clear now. This wasn't just a random encounter. The creature, the haunted ship, it was just the beginning of something far greater. The galaxy was on the brink of something unimaginable, and the unknown ship was only the first of many. With a grim resolve, Ariana set her course for the nearest fleet. She needed to warn them, to rally whatever forces were left. The haunted junk ship had been a warning of the darkness that was about to descend upon them all. And this time, there would be no escape.